سمرة يم الحنة ورد العصب مالك
شالت 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 وحطت في قطنة سمرة يم الحنة ورد العصب مالك
شالت 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 وحطت على البير سمرة يا أميري رد العصب مالك
شالت 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 وحطت على البير سمرة يا أميري رد العصب مالك
لا من هالداري الكبير اللي على جال الطريق هذه لك يا ابو محمد والعطشاني بالريق
لا من هالطريق الكبير اللي على جال الطريق هذه لك يا ابو محمد والعطشاني بالريق
لا من هالدار الكبير اللي حواليها بركوك هذه لك يا ابو محمد جينة كلك مبروك
لا من هالطريق الكبير اللي على جال الطريق هذه لك يا ابو محمد والعطشاني بالريق
لا من هالدار الكبير اللي حواليها سريس هذه لك يا ابو الياس جينا نهن العريس عنا عنا
عنا عنا
وترزف
في الليل عنا
عنا عنا
عنا عنا
وترزف
في الليل عنا
عنا عنا عنا عنا وترزف في الليل حنا انتي عندي
يا بلادي
اغلى من روحي
وفؤادي
انتي عندي
يا بلادي
اغلى من روحي وفؤادي لا ضل انضم لك حدادي زاد وشروكي ومعنا
شالت 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 وحطت في رمى الله صبرا يمكن مرة بالعصب مالك
شالت 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 وصفى الزاتوني صحرا يا مسنوني رد العصب مالك
شالت 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 وحطت في قطنة صبرا يمكن حنة رد العصب مالك شالت 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 وحطت على البيت صبرا يا أميري رد العصب مالك
يا رمان على العين يلا تنغنيلو يا محمد اليوم عرسو يلا تنغنيلو ويا محمل حمل التفاح هيا يا عيني هيا ميتت من بنات الملاح محمد يا نور عنايا هيا يا عيني هيا ميتت من بنات الملاح محمد يا نور عنايا شيخ الدب جلوح بيمينك قطعت قلبي وانا داخلك وان غيبت عني القمر بدينك يا ابو محرم الدلع دلعونا يا ابو الشباب وشبب عسينك خلي الدب يجي تتعلم منك لا فر القضا ما بلقى زيك يا ابو الشباب دلع دلعونا يا طير الطاير سلم على البير على القدس الشريف سلم على الطير وتراب بلادي سجد حريري والمي بلسم والبعد جنونه وتراب بلادي سجد حريري والمي بلسم والبعد جنونه وتراب بلادي سجد حريري والمي بلسم والبعد جنونه تتمايل على الجنبين بيت الجمال ما شاهدتها العين ويا زاري تتمايل على الجنبين بيت الجمال ما شاهدتها العين خالق ربنا. شركة إنسان ترحب بكل الجمهور مع باكات الزهور والورود. المحبوب في بادر نيسان. يا زارف الطول يا وارد ريحان، شبعت المحبوب في بادر نيسان.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Abir. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Palestinian American Community Center. On behalf of all of us at PACC, I just want to welcome you to day 2 of our conference. For those of you that were with us yesterday for opening day, you know how amazing those conversations were, and we're really excited to continue those conversations. Today, our focus is going to be on the past. So our theme is the past, present, and future. Today, we're going to focus on the past. We are extremely lucky to have 2 great speakers and presenters who are going to give us educational overview of Palestine's history and also of other community struggles in the US specifically. I am gonna just go ahead and get us started. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know it's a Friday night, so thank you all for joining us and for choosing us to spend your Friday night with. I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Barry Mahmoud, who is the moderator for our first session.
Thank you, Abir. Hello, marhaba everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 2021 PACC Virtual Conference. My name is Barry Mahmoud, and I will be presenting our first panel for tonight, which will be an educational overview of Palestinian history. The session will provide a brief 101 of Palestinian history, starting off specifically in relation to its occupation and settler colonialism. Joining us for today's first panel is Dr. Amani Jamal. Dr. Jamal is the Edward S. Sanford Professor of Politics at Princeton University and the director of the Mamdouha S. Bobs Center for Peace and Justice. Dr. Jamal also directs the workshop on Arab political development. Her work primarily focuses on the micro-level determinants of political behavior in the Middle East, and her new book project explores the role of inequality on civic and political engagement in the US and Middle East. Dr. Jamal will speak for 45 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes for a Q&A. Please feel free to type out your questions throughout the session in the chat below, and we will get to them all at the end in the order that they are received. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and I'll pass it off to Dr. Jamel.
Thank you so much, Barry, for that lovely introduction. Marhaba, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. I really do want to thank the fantastic work of Abir, Rania, Ahmad, everybody behind the scenes. It's really a pleasure to work with you. Everything was done so logistically fine-tuned to the extent that this is sort of like seamless. So I appreciate that. Again, it's a great pleasure to be here. I know we had scheduled, I think, an in-live session last year around this time, right before COVID broke out, and then we had to cancel that. So I'm glad that we're reconvening, albeit virtually. Hopefully next year we'll be, or sooner, we'll be able to convene in person. So today I'll be talking, sort of giving like my historical overview of the Palestinian situation, focusing on the issue of occupation and settlements. And, I'm going to, the history of Palestine is a very long and complicated history. There are a lot of nuances and details and developments. And I'm trying to sort of, keep it simple and try to provide you with a systematic theme that we will capture here, unfortunately, and that systematic theme is one of displacement, occupation, displacement, further occupation, settlements, then settler colonialism, which leads to even further displacement. So I will focus on the historical developments, but I will also sort of be updating it and bringing it into the modern period, sort of to set the stage for a firm understanding about how history links into the present day. And with that, I'm going to start. I know that Abir, you mentioned that the Q&A would be handled through the chat. If something is like glaringly unclear and needs clarification, by all means, find a way to raise your hand or, stop me. I do want to make sure that everybody is following the lecture here. And I know we will have a very lively Q&A session. So I'm also looking forward to that as well. Okay. I think Ahmed, oh, very good. Okay, so starting from the present and then working our way backwards to the history, if we sort of look at the last 100 years of the Palestinian situation, what you see on the far left is historic Palestine in 1917. If you look at the areas highlighted in blue, that basically signals Zionist or Israeli control or Jewish control, if you may, of the land of Palestine. Moving forward, 1948, we see that the blue gets a little bit darker. By 1967 and the Six-Day War, but basically the West Bank and Gaza are your white areas. And then today, what you can see is that even in the West Bank, there's a sea of blue, which basically tells you that the Zionist control has sort of infiltrated and penetrated into the West Bank. Slide. When you just that other slide, yes, really quickly, this is also right here. This sort of lets you see population centers. So the previous slide was about Zionist control. This is about population centers where individuals from each historic community are presiding right now. You'll see that the blue is Israel. A lot of the blue is now in the West Bank and around the West Bank. So I just wanted to make sure that you sort of look from 1917 to today to see where the population centers are located. Okay, slide. So stepping back, almost a century ago, there wasn't an Israeli state, and we didn't talk about Israel as a state in the heart of the Middle East as such. Israel is very much a modern creation. And if we want to be technical about the timing of its creation, it's really sort of a post-World War II creation. But let me sort of walk you through the evolution of the idea of the Jewish state. As many of you know, historically, if we went back even further, even back to the Islamic Empire, there were always minorities of Jews living in the Holy Lands. And they were, they lived in ancient Egypt, they lived in, modern day Israel / Palestine, they lived in the Levant area. There were always minorities of Jewish people and pockets of Jewish people living amongst Arab and Muslim civilization historically. Fast forward to the end of the Ottoman era, which sort of is encapsulated by, at the eve of World War I in the early 1900s, what you see is that there was a growing group of Jews living in Europe that that were suffering at the hands of the Europeans. So the Jews in Europe faced great levels of anti-Semitism and discrimination. And it was in Europe that this idea that a Jewish national home needed to be created to protect Jews so that they wouldn't be victims of discrimination in Europe and in the rest of the world. And so this idea was more or less born with Theodor Herzl. He's the author of The Jewish State. He lives from 1860 to 1904, but in 1896, he publishes the book, The Jewish State, which more or less is considered to be the ideological basis for political Zionism. And political Zionism here means a manifestation of the idea that there needs to be a Jewish state to protect Jews. So when the Zionist Congress sort of mobilizing behind this idea of Jewish nationalism, when they convened in Switzerland in 1897, one of the key issues on their agenda was sort of like to decide where the Jewish state would be located. So it wasn't like a foregone conclusion that modern day Palestine would become the Jewish state. There were a lot of different ideas floated there. Yes, historically and theologically, Jews had an attachment to Jerusalem. But nevertheless, it wasn't very obvious that Palestine would become the homeland of Jews. What benefited Zionist organization on the idea of the Jewish state was that most of the organizers and technocrats and thinkers behind the Jewish state were located in Europe at the time. And as many of you know, if you think about what was happening in Palestine in the early 1900s, right? The Ottoman Empire is on the demise. World War I is setting in motion. You have the British Empire emerging in salience, and it's basically taking control of Palestine. And it's against this backdrop of British ascendance in the region, the decline of Ottoman Empire, and the political mobilization of Zionists in Europe demanding for a Jewish state. So if you think about like the Zionist spokesperson, Chaim Weizmann, he's located in London. He is actively keeping the Zionist question in front of the British cabinet during this time. And more or less, the British begin to make commitments to the Zionists mobilizing in Europe about a future Jewish state in Palestine to further British imperial interest, the British colony, the British imperial project, if you may, in the Middle East. So sort of like Palestine, the issue of Palestine is not only a victim of British imperialism and Zionist mobilization at the time. It's just really, it's in this unfortunate space where others are deciding its future. Slide. So fast forward up due to this political mobilization in Europe, in 1917, Arthur Balfour, then the British Foreign Secretary, endorsed the idea of a national home for the Jewish people without prejudice, and we'll come back to that because nobody ever comes back to this idea about without prejudice, against the civil and religious rights of the non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So this idea that in Palestine there will be a Jewish national homeland is declared by the British. No Palestinian is basically privy to this declaration. And in fact, in 1917, Jews constituted about no more than 10% of the entire population of Palestine. slide. Now, oftentimes, sorry about the slide. It looked better before I think I forwarded it, but let me just give you the gist here. Oftentimes when you're dealing with Palestinian history, you'll hear things like, well, the Palestinians never mobilized. The Palestinians never represented their case to the British effectively. The Palestinians didn't really resist. The Palestinian, that this idea that the Palestinians sort of not only sat by and allowed for Jewish immigration to come into Palestine, but when they did resist, they did it so wrong that they sort of deserved the outcome of basically their land being taken away and stolen for the creation of the Jewish state. So this has been like a sore point for Palestinians who have to sort of recall the history of the creation of the state of Israel to not only to sort of figure to monitor how their country was basically taken away with them gradually by the work of imperial forces and the organized Zionist groups in Europe, but then also to be told is that, more or less, if the Palestinians knew better and worked better and operated better, they could have resisted that the creation of the state of Israel. So let me just show you what the Palestinian resistance looked like. As early as 1918, right after Balfour, a delegation of the Muslim Christian Association headed by Musa al-Husseini expressed public disapproval on November 3rd, 1918, one day after the Zionist Commission parade marking the first anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. Again, the Balfour Declaration was seen as this huge accomplishment for the Zionist organizations in Europe. They handed a petition signed by more than 100 notables to Ronald Storrs, a military governor, a British military governor. And this is what they wrote. We have noticed yesterday a large crowd of Jews carrying banners and overrunning the streets in Palestine, shouting words which hurt the feeling and wounded the soul. They pretend with open voice that Palestine, which is the holy land of our fathers and the graveyard of our ancestors, which has been inhabited by the Arabs for long ages, who loved it and died in defending it, is now a national home for them. We Arabs, Muslim, and Christians have always sympathized profoundly with the persecuted Jews and their misfortunes in other countries. But there is wide difference between such sympathy and the acceptance of such a nation ruling over us and disposing of our affairs. Slide. So this illustrates the type of resistance, feelings of dispossession, trying to appeal to the imperial rulers, conquering them at the time, the British, to sort of reverse this action. So what does this Balfour Declaration mean? It signals, first of all, the role of international players and external actors in shaping the debate about the future of Palestine. Not only was it the British, but then you get the French, you get the Zionist mobilization. You have also Sharif Hussein, who's in modern day Saudi Arabia. Basically, a lot of actors are colluding on the future of Palestine in ways that undermine Palestinian interests, and you never necessarily have Palestinian representatives or officials at the table representing the Palestinian cause. Furthermore, at this time, the vast majority of Palestinians are subsistence farmers. They rely on the land, they depend on the land for their livelihood. So if they're being displaced off the land, they're being removed from their means of subsistence. During this time, they are appealing, they are sending, representatives after representatives, notable family members over to the British to basically argue their case. The British, in the spirit of trying to sort of keep the peace, are making promises to the Palestinians. They're also making promises to the Zionists. So this is sort of what I always like to call, when I teach this, is the era of competing promises. A lot of deception and betrayals going on by the British towards the Palestinians. Thus, for Arabs and Palestinians, Zionism has always been seen as a byproduct of British colonialism. And I just have this point about skewed parallelism, this idea that, well, if only the Palestinians could have organized, and if only the Palestinians could have lobbied the British, and if only the Palestinians could match the savvy of the Zionist operation in Europe, they may have prevented what was coming down the pipeline. Again, as I mentioned, the vast majority of Palestinians were subsistence farmers. I believe it's Rashid Khaldi who says that when Balfour was signed in 1917, not one Palestinian had ever been in Europe, right? So this idea that the Palestinians miraculously had to reconfigure themselves, become politically savvy and organized and be able to lobby the British Parliament is just an absurd notion, and trying to create this like parallel between the Zionist organization and subsistence Palestinian farmers is absurd. These were two different organizations from the onset. Next slide. So with the Balfour Declaration, this sets in motion the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for the next century, right? The next century of conflict that we today, the generation of Palestinians, sort of look at and sort of, are sort of appalled by what we see today. This is where it was set in motion. And at the time, several key players were worried about setting in motion the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as we see it today. So even among the British, Lord Curzon, who succeeded Balfour as Foreign Secretary in 1919.
I don't know.
2 years later. Sorry, is that for me? No, okay, sorry. As Foreign Secretary in 1919, he said that the Balfour Declaration was the worst of Britain's Middle East commitments and a striking contradiction of our publicly declared principles, especially the principles they were making to the Palestinians. According to the 1919 King Crane Commission, no British officer consulted by the commissioners believed that the Zionist program could be carried out except by force of arms, right? So this idea that the Palestinians would peacefully allow an Israeli state to be created was not founded in reality. That if there was going to be a Palestinian state, it was probably going to have to be built by force. While mainstream Zionism publicly proclaimed that the two communities in Palestine could live harmoniously together, Jewish activists such as Ze'ev Jabotinsky, as early as 1923, presented the honest facts. All native populations will resist colonialists, and Palestinians were no different. The Jews needed an iron wall of bayonets. In other words, if they were going to impose an Israeli state on the Palestinians. And Rashid Khaldi, in his book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, which if anybody's interested in history, this is an excellent book for everyone to take a look at with very much nuanced history. 100 Years War on Palestine, what Khalidi says is with Balfour, there ensued what amounts to 100 years of war against the Palestinian people. Slide. Okay, just to give you some numbers now about what did historic Palestine look like. So I mentioned that in 1917, no more than 10% of the population of Palestine was Jewish, 90% were Palestinians. By 1931, as more and more Jewish immigration from Europe came to Palestine, by 1931, you begin to see about roughly 20% of the population is Jewish and about 80% is Palestinian. Between 1933 and 1936, these are also the events leading up to World War II in Europe. You see another 165,000 Jews entering Palestine. I mean, the British also would make promises to Jews to say, yes, go to Palestine, you will be received in more or less welcome arms. And then at other times they would cut off Jewish immigration. So, and this is alongside the horrors of Europe, what was happening, but for the Palestinians, this was a shocking development. So by 1936, you have about 400,000 Jews entering Palestine. Now it's about 30% of the total population. And then by 1948, the 1948 war, the Jewish population is close to 33% of the total population of Palestine. But then you have the United Nations Resolution 181. It grants the Jews about 55% of historic Palestine in that resolution, while they constitute 33% of the population. And if you look at UN Resolution 181, the vast majority of land is basically the coastal plains, which are the best lands for farming, for the orange groves, for all sort of like subsistence farming that we were talking about in terms of the Palestinian interest. So UN Resolution 181, before I get to this slide, I just want to say a word about UN Resolution 181. This was supposed to be the United, there's a whole committee and commission. I'm not going to get into it because I know time is going to be an issue for me today. But more or less, as the British mandate was ending, on the eve of World War II, the United Nations put together a special commission that stipulated that this is the way Palestine would be divided, with Jerusalem being an international city. I'm missing a lot of the details. Most important to note about that commission, there was not one Arab or Palestinian on that committee to represent the issue of Palestine. So basically the world determined that Israel should be created in Palestine. Jerusalem became was proposed to be an international city. 55% of the land was given to the state of Israel, while they only constitute 33% of the population. So for Palestinians, this was not only injustice, it was an injustice upon another injustice by international actors. Okay, slide. Now, in Palestine at the time, right, it's one thing to have sanction from the international community to build your state in Palestine. It's another when you're dealing with the demographic reality on the ground, right? Palestinians live throughout the land of Palestine. So in order to create a Jewish state for the Jewish people without Palestinians, right, because that's sort of the nature of the Jewish state, there were plans in effect on how to displace the Palestinians from historic Palestine. These were deliberately designed plans. I mean, oftentimes, again, when you hear about our own history as Palestinians, we're told that sort of what the displacements that happened in 1948 were sort of like the natural causes of war, that they were sort of inadvertent, that Israel would have otherwise loved to keep the Palestinians. This is not true, right? I mean, even the material I'm presenting here has been documented by Israeli historians. So there were deliberate designs to remove Palestinians from the land. That was sort of given by the United Nations Special Commission during the 1948 UN Resolution 181. So some examples of this, during preceding the 1948 war, Plan Dalat was put into effect. So on March 10th, 1948, Zionist political and military leaders, including Ben-Gurion, formulated Plan Dalat, or Plan D. The operational military order specified which Palestinian population centers should be targeted and laid out in detail a blueprint for their forcible depopulation and destruction. It called for destruction of villages, setting fire to, blowing up, planting mines in the debris, especially those population centers which are difficult to control continuously. In other words, where Palestinians resisted being displaced, they were going to be confronted by the heavy machinery of a state in formation. And basically, by design, the areas that were to be depopulated would become part of the future Israeli state. According to Ilan Pappé, in March 1948, this leadership, the Zionist leadership, produced Plan Dalat, which he believes was a clear blueprint for the systematic removal of Palestinians from Palestine. Okay, slide. So by the time the state of Israel was declared in 1948, May 14th, 1948, more than 200 Palestinian villages had already been emptied as people fled in fear or were forcibly expelled, and approximately 175,000 Palestinians had been made refugees. By 1948, at least 750,000 Palestinians had been made refugees, losing their land, homes, and other belongings in what became known as the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe for the Palestinians. Today, refugees displaced during Israel's creation and their descendants number approximately 7.1 million people. So this has like generational consequences. Fast forward, we get to the Six-Day War in 1967. There's a war between Israel and the Arab states on the issue, of course, of Palestine. Israel wins that war. It actually wins that war in 6 days. That's another topic for another time. 80,000 Syrians were inhabiting the Golan Heights, fall under Israeli occupation. Jordan receives another 300,000 new Palestinian refugees. And now the remaining Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, 1.3 million Palestinians live under Israeli occupation in the West Bank and Gaza. Slide. Okay, so now under occupation. Now Israel is occupying the West Bank and Gaza. We've had over 1.5 million displaced refugees basically sent outside of the country. A lot of internal displacement is happening within Palestine, within the West Bank. In Gaza, you have refugee camps. In the West Bank, you have refugee camps. On top of that, the Israeli policies on the West Bank basically aim to forcibly transfer and concentrate the Palestinian population into isolated Bantuστans. This plan more or less becomes a part of the Israeli strategy on the West Bank, I would argue, as early as the 1970s, so almost immediately after the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. And the goal is to ensure the continued expansion of illegal settlements on Palestinian land in the West Bank. So Israel set out to control as much of the West Bank as possible and drive out as many Palestinians from the land that it controls as much as feasible as it can, right? So its goal is to further remove Palestinians from the West Bank, or at least concentrate them and displace them internally. So this becomes part of the larger strategy of settler colonialism. It's a key characteristic of Israeli policies and actions, especially on the West Bank. Slide. So just to sort of summarize where we are in this post-1967 moment, shortly after its occupation of the Palestinian territory in 1967, Israel unilaterally and illegally expanded the municipal borders of Jerusalem, enlarging occupied East Jerusalem tenfold. And then all around East Jerusalem, it began to place these massive settlement projects. The new borders were drawn to incorporate also Palestinian agricultural lands from other districts, such as Ramallah and Bethlehem, which excluded many population centers, but nevertheless captured major farming areas. In 1980, Israel extended its basic law to the occupied city of Jerusalem, thus entrenching the illegal annexation of East Jerusalem, which we saw that Donald Trump, when he was president, basically blessed Israel on annexing East Jerusalem, though still by international law, the international community considers Israel's annexation of occupied East Jerusalem null and void in accordance with UN Security Resolution 478, among others. So even though the US sort of unilaterally went this road, East Jerusalem, by all practical legal definitions, is still occupied territory. Next slide. Then we get to the land grab and the settlement projects. I just want to read this. There was this massive story in the New Yorker once where about Netanyahu and the settlements. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's still the prime minister and has been the prime minister for the better part of the last 2 decades, or the worst part of the last 2 decades, whatever you want to call it. His settlement policy resembles his predecessors in many ways, but it is a march toward permanence. in a time when prospects for peace are few. He has built the settlements as basically changing facts on the ground for a permanent solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, one that basically involves Israel in the West Bank. Slide. Okay, so all of you probably know, this is sort of like me sort of like linking the history to the more modern day, but I have to talk about the Oslo Accords. Again, I'm not going to do much justice to the Oslo Accords, except to say that from 1967 to 1993, there were some attempts at at negotiations and peace. Egypt, when at it alone with Camp David in 1981, sort of had a bilateral peace treaty with Israel at the time. Then there was nothing really proposed of meaningful substance for the Palestinian issue. I mean, some others might disagree. Then there were the 1982 Israeli incursion into Lebanon, which further devastated the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and actually the Palestinians in Lebanon, along with Lebanese citizens. The PLO basically ends up in Tunisia. And from 1967 to about the late 1980s, you have a whole new generation of Palestinians who are growing up under Israeli occupation. And the harsh realities and almost inhumane realities of the occupation and the daily struggles of what Palestinians have to live with, living under occupation, basically serves as the impetus for Palestinian mobilization to end the occupation. And this was like the 1987 Palestinian Intifada is set in motion with Palestinians protesting the Israeli presence on the West Bank, the Israeli presence in terms of its occupation, but I want to remind you, when we say occupation, it's just not this idea that you have an Israeli checkpoint on the West Bank. The occupation regime itself comes with a set of policies that are designed to do nothing more than to disenfranchise and almost dehumanize an entire race or population. So this generation of Palestinians growing up under occupation resisted it, and they set in motion what is often referred to as a nonviolent protest against the occupation. It won a lot of international sympathy at the time. This is like the time where Rabin was going around breaking the bones of Palestinian youth because they were throwing rocks in demonstrations. So there was a lot of international pressure on Israel to basically figure it out on Palestine. More or less, long story short, this brings the PLO back in the picture. And out of those negotiations emerges the Oslo Accords. For better or worse, the Oslo Accords are considered to be in spirit, trying to resolve this ongoing Palestinian conflict. I have a lot to say about this. I'll just to be sort of, fair, just to sort of try to be neutral on my opinion on Oslo. I would say that the people who signed the Oslo Accords maybe believed that it would end in a real Palestinian state with real territorial integrity. But maybe the international community in Israel had other goals. That's a generous reading of it. A more skeptical reading of it is that the Oslo Accord really brought the PLO back in the picture, and it was in the strategic interest of the PLO to sign the Oslo Accords to make sure that they remained relevant in the Palestinian situation. We can talk about this in Q&A. I don't want to get into it now, but nevertheless, the Oslo Accords set in motion what is still referred to as now the almost 30-year peace process. Right now, during the 30-year peace process, according to data published by the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics, the number of Jewish settlers in the West Bank increased from 110,000 in September 1993 to 413,000 at the end of 2014. So that's almost a four times increase in settlers, the number of settlers during the peace process. Settlement Watch of the Peace Now movement in 2015 said that the number of Jewish settlements in the West Bank had reached 130 settlements, in addition to 103 settlement outposts. So in addition to the quote unquote official settlements built by the Israeli government, you have all these like random settler outposts that are scattered throughout the West Bank. And oftentimes Israel and Israeli spokespeople say, well, those are outposts, those are illegal. But the fact that they're provided security and they're protected by the Israeli government makes them a little bit less informal and illegal from the Israeli perspective. So we have settlements and settlement outposts scattered throughout the West Bank, 19 of which have been, sorry here, just want to make sure I can see my own notes here, have been established since 2012 during the tenure of current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Next slide. Okay, today. There are now today approximately 650,000 Israeli settlers living in more than 200 colonies or settlements in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem. Around half of the West Bank is allocated to the settlements or otherwise off limits to Palestinians. And you'll see later, like this percentage continues to sort of increase when you bring in legal provisions on what is permitted, what is permissible land for Palestinians to have access to on the West Bank. Slide. Israel particularly focuses its efforts to displace the Palestinians on the 60% of the West Bank designated by the Oslo Accords as Area C, and I'll have maps right now to show you. So the West Bank during the Oslo Accords was designated into three areas, areas A, B, and C. Area A is the one area that the Palestinians have quote unquote full control of administratively, but they really don't have control of the borders. Area B is an area where Palestinians have some administrative control, but Israel has full security control there. And Area C is basically under full control of the Israeli state. The illegal Israeli settlements on stolen and forcibly vacated Palestinian land are financed and built under the direct control of the Israeli government. Violent settlers who carry out attacks on Palestinians are protected by the Israeli military and are rarely held accountable. So not only is there the issue of the confiscation of land for the settlement project, but the settlers themselves, on average, if not like majority, are motivated by very xenophobic attitudes towards the Palestinians. And you have an unarmed population living under Israeli occupation with now settlers in their midst, who basically many sort of tout the line that a good Arab is a dead Arab, and they are armed. So keep this in mind. This is sort of like the present day condition of the Palestinian situation on the West Bank. Slide. Okay, so just to stick with the point about Area C, since Area C on the West Bank is under full Israeli control, and many will argue is part of like Israel's future annexation plans, I mean, it's not even an argument. I think it's very obvious. Houses built in Area C without an almost impossibility to obtain Israeli construction permits are demolished. So because Palestinians existed and lived in the West Bank before Oslo, during Oslo, they inherited land from their parents, their relatives. All of a sudden, some of this land gets designated as Area C, which means if you have a house in Area C or you built a house in Area C, now it's illegal. And illegal houses, even though Palestinians try to get these licenses, try to access Israeli courts, try to get some sort of representation. And it's not very easy to navigate because remember, most Palestinians now can't travel to Israeli areas to even access these courts, right? These houses get demolished. Since 1967, Israel has demolished 25,000 Palestinian homes, most of which have been in the West Bank. In the period between 2011 to 2014 alone, 4,298 Palestinians were displaced due to demolitions or evictions. Israel also regularly rezones Palestinian land in Area C. So like, again, Israel can unilaterally just say, okay, well, Area C is now expanding. It's expanding, and guess what? This house that is here is now Area C. You must leave the house. Area C, and so they close it off as military areas. and they use this as a pretext for forced displacements and further demolitions. Slide. Okay, so I just want to show you now pictures. Sorry about this. I should have maybe had this slide before. Just really quickly, just to sort of capture where we are. If you look at the middle slide, the white area is the West Bank. Jerusalem is there, as you all see it. Look on the right side in terms of what we're trying to deal with the West Bank right now. So Palestinian control, and this is sort of, you're going to see another slide shortly. This is sort of an exaggerated slide about the actual percentage of land that Palestinians really do control. But what I do want to draw your attention to is the blue, the large Israeli settlements and the small Israeli settlements. The large settlements are scattered throughout the West Bank. The smaller Israeli settlements are scattered throughout the West Bank. And most importantly, each of the areas that is allegedly under Palestinian control, because you'll see another slide in a bit that will sort of make this all the more starker. Each of the areas that is under Palestinian control is divided by these Israeli settlements, right? So you have no contiguous territory on the West Bank in terms of Palestinian controlled areas. Slide. This is a better picture. And it's still an exaggerated picture, but I still want to show it to you. So this is the land. This is what all the red, to make it simple, is Area C now on the West Bank. All of this area is under Israeli control. So if you look at where Jerusalem is, which is, I can't show you, but to just sort of visualize it from the previous slide, all of Jerusalem is under Israeli control. All of the Jordan Valley, the territory next to the Jordan Valley and around Jericho is under Israeli control. But more importantly, the white areas are areas A and B. Now, remember, I told you Area B is still under Israeli control. But so this is a picture that does not capture things accurately, but nevertheless, just look at the vast magnitude of Area C. Next slide. Okay, on the West Bank, there is a duality of laws. There are two different legal regimes, one for the Israelis and one for the Palestinians. Now, we're not talking even anymore about the Arabs who live in Israel, who they also suffer from a different set of issues and discriminatory laws and practices. Now we're talking about the two regimes that exist in the West Bank, right? So it's now fast forward another 50 years, the same pattern is being created in the West Bank. While Israeli settlers are governed by Israeli civilian law, Palestinians in the West Bank outside of East Jerusalem are ruled by Israeli military law. Palestinians in the West Bank face physical segregation, systematic discrimination, and violent repression so that Israel can maintain the racial domination of the Jewish Israeli settlers over Palestinians. Israel's policies in the West Bank amount to apartheid, as independent studies have shown. Next slide. I just put this up. I know you can't read it, but I did want to just sort of give you a little bit more substantive flavor of the two different regimes governing the Palestinian people. When we think about everything from courts, from criminal proceedings, planning and construction, water, I think that's, freedom of movement, freedom of expression and political participation, all of those factors, right? You have two different sets of laws, one for the settlers and one for the Palestinians. Next slide. On top of this, the water resources are a major problem for Palestinians, especially, as I've been trying to say, a good percentage of Palestinians even today rely on subsistence farming. So these pictures sort of illustrate the dilemma. On the settlements, the Israelis are building swimming pools and filling their swimming pools, and they have access to consistent clean water, while Palestinians basically get water turned on maybe once a week. When I travel to Palestine to visit my family, I'm off. I have to remember that, okay, the water, you have only 2 or 3 days more often 2 days a week to make sure that you have fresh water coming into your house. So the water is basically being relegated by Israel, and a lot of Palestinians have to store water, have to make sure that they have these big containers to store water so that they can have, you know, drinking water and be able to continue with their daily activities like cooking and things of that sort. So really quick, the West Bank, I know, yeah, the West Bank is rich in water resources, but Israel illegally controls all sources of water in the West Bank and deliberately allocates water in a discriminatory way. Israelis and Israeli settlers are on average able to use 4 times more water than Palestinians. Many Palestinians are unable to access enough water for good health or agriculture. Amnesty International, and it's not only Amnesty International, the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, all the major human rights groups have accused Israel of depriving Palestinians of their access to water as a means of expulsion. Again, systematic policy of displacement and removing Palestinians from the land. Next slide, please. Freedom of movement. On top of everything else, the freedom of movement of Palestinians is heavily restricted by the settler colonial project. In July 2018, the UN completed a comprehensive closure survey that recorded 705 permanent obstacles across the West Bank, restricting or controlling Palestinian vehicle and in some cases pedestrian movement. This figure is 3% higher than in December 2016, the date of the previous survey. So with each survey, what you're going to see and find actually moving to the future, and I'm sorry that I'm taking us to the future, but I think it's really important to see the evolution of the settler colonial project. With each additional survey, you're going to find more and more restrictions. This is, I believe, at this is at one of the crossings into Israel. As you can see, basically, Palestinians are like jailed into these spaces. Sometimes they're held here for hours on end. Sometimes they're told to return. They can't go to work. So these are very humiliating conditions for Palestinians who are trying to seek daily subsistence for their livelihoods. Next slide, please. And sometimes, sorry, and really quickly, sometimes you'll see reports that says, well, the number of Israeli checkpoints on the West Bank has been reduced considerably in the last, let's say, 5 years. That's not true. I mean, it's technically true, but if you look at all the obstacles that prevent mobility on the West Bank for Palestinians, they're not only checkpoints. So, and I just want to give you an idea. So these road barriers, which I don't know if you can see them, but on the left, in your left corner, the top there are road barriers. These are like, you'll be driving, all of a sudden you'll see these big bricks in the road. Those are not checkpoints, those are road barriers. Those tell you that you cannot move forward. The checkpoints on the West Bank, the partial checkpoints, the trenches or ditches that are dug up, the road gates, the earth walls, the earth mounds, and the roadblocks. So when somebody says the number of checkpoints have been reduced, well, you should say the number of barriers or the number of objects that are placed by Israel to minimize Palestinian movement and ensure that they're confined to certain areas has increased, actually. Okay, next slide. And just to give you an idea of, the Israeli road project, because all the settlements that I showed you that are scattered throughout the West Bank, that divide up the West Bank, they need roads. But this was in 2018, even a little bit further, more remarkable, which is that you have roads. Now, you know, the Palestinians cannot access roads that Israelis can drive on. But typically the Palestinian roads are, a few hundred meters away from the Israeli road. So if on the West Bank, you'll be driving, you'll see that there's the Israeli highway above or the Israeli roads over there. And sometimes you wish, if I can get on that Israeli highway, I can get to my destination much more quickly, because a lot of the roads that we on the West Bank we have are still, were roads built during the British Mandate that accommodate one car per lane at a time. Built on swerving mountain hills, right? It's always been a miracle that the PA was not able to do more with the road infrastructure in Palestine, given the amount of foreign aid that came in. But we can talk about that in the Q&A. But what's interesting here is that you have roads that were obviously used by Israelis and Palestinians in certain areas. And what Israel did is built a barrier on the road to basically say Israelis can only drive on one side and the Palestinians drive on the other. So like complete apartheid, segregation. Here, they could probably even make the argument that these are separate but equal. But across the West Bank, there's nothing equal about the road infrastructure between the Palestinians and Israelis. But this is as of 2018 that these barriers are going up to separate the Palestinians from Israelis on the West Bank. Next slide, please. Okay, so today's predicament. Where are we today? So this is a more accurate map of where things stand today. Today, the Israeli state allocates 99.7% of all the land grants on the West Bank to settlers. So anytime you go to request sort of like permits from Israel, because now you need Israeli permission to build in many of these areas, especially in areas A, B, and C. Disproportionately, 99% of those licenses and land grants are going to Israeli settlers. Area C, so Area C is everything in the light pink, constitutes 61% of the West Bank. When you consider the zoning parameters, the legal restrictions that they place around Area C, that is now 70% of the West Bank. So Area C now is 70% of the West Bank. So what's left is Area B and Area A. So before I read my next bullet, I want to just make sure that you understand the green areas on this map are Area A's, are Area A places. The dark pink ones are Area B. So where Palestinians have full control, basically you can basically say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7, 8, less than 9 areas that are scattered, small areas scattered far away almost from one another, except for the cluster in the north and the cluster in the south. This is where the Palestinians have now been displaced to, where they're being concentrated to, where the obstacles to their mobility are being placed. In March 2012, it was revealed that the civil administration over the years covertly, this is Israeli civil administration, allotted 10% of the West Bank for further settlement activity. Provisional names for future new settlements or settlement expansions were already assigned, and the plan includes many Palestinian built up sites in areas A and B. So even in some of the plan, this was reported by Haaretz. So everything that was reported here has been reported in the Israeli media. So that there are still further plans to expand further into areas A and B to build future settlements. If we believe that area C will be annexed by Israel, and if we believe that area B will be in the future annexed by Israel, it leaves area A, which is less than about 18% of the entire West Bank. And the question is, what does that mean for any future, for the Palestinians, their overall well-being, but like, where is the Palestinian state gonna be on the West Bank, given this map? And if there are plans to still further populate the West Bank with more settlers in the settler colonialism project, it means that things don't look very well or promising for the Palestinians in the future. So with that, I know, sorry, I went over time a little bit. I do look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jamal. That was a really great presentation. I'm sure everyone took something, if not everything, from it. And now we will get to a couple of questions. So first up, we have, were there any benefits from the Oslo Accords if we had signed it?
So, okay, so very good. So let me just, that's a very good question. So let's just be accurate about it. The Palestinians did sign the Oslo Accords, right? So the 1993 Palestinian Oslo Accords were signed by the Palestinians. The problem with the Oslo Accords is, if you read the Oslo Accords, it has a lot of wonderful language about, you know, peace and reconciliation and a future Palestinian state. The substance is not there. What will the Palestinian state look like? How will it operate? What type of economic agreements and terms will guide the Palestinian state? It did not give the Palestinians any firm reassurances or guarantees about a future Palestinian state. Everything was to be handled in negotiations. So the Palestinians have been negotiating. I think what the person asking the question, sorry, I apologize, I can't, there are many questions, I can't find your name, but I think what you're asking is, had the Palestinians signed the Camp David 2000 Accords, would they have been better off? And again, you know, in hindsight, it's always easier to answer those type of questions in hindsight. When we do talk to people who were privy to the Camp David 2000 negotiations between Israel, the Palestinians, the PLO representatives or the PNA, including Yasser Arafat at the time, and we talked to American officials who were present in those negotiations. This all happened under the Bill Clinton years. What we're told is that there were maybe 3 outstanding issues that the Palestinians and Israelis hadn't agreed to. One was the issue of Jerusalem, right? The issue of Jerusalem was a very important issue. It became clear that the Israelis were willing to make very few concessions on it. The Israelis were not accepting to accept responsibility for the displacement of Palestinians, which meant that the right of return, even the right of return to a future Palestinian state, was under question. And there were issues about land swaps and the settlement blocks, right? So, you know, could there have been something signed then that would have been better in terms of where the Palestinians are now? I'm not entirely sure, right? Because it seems to me that every agreement Israel has signed with the Palestinians had the aspiration of furthering the Israeli presence on the West Bank, furthering the settler project on the West Bank, and ensuring that the Palestinians had, had a smaller amount of land in terms of where they reside. So I'm not entirely convinced that had they signed it, it would have been beneficial in their interest. But again, in hindsight, things always look rosier than where we sit now.
Thank you so much. Next question is, what should we say to people who claim there was no Palestinian resistance before the Intifada?
I mean, that's not true, right? I mean, you know, we can go through, and again, I gave you a very sort of a bird's eye overview about the type of resistance that emerged, but there was a lot of mobilization, there was a lot of resistance almost at every single critical juncture of Palestinian occupation, and they're living under Palestinian occupation. And it's not like Palestinians did not have the foresight to see where all of this was going. So there was active resistance, there was active lobbying, but let's just keep everything in perspective, right? If we buy into the argument, which has been substantiated, so it's not really an argument. If we buy into the international context that facilitates the creation of the State of Israel, whether it was the British in the early period of its creation, or whether it's the role of the United States post Six-Day War, right? The Palestinians have always been unmatched, have not had the same stage, have not had the same access points to winning over supporters of their cause, right? They are the weaklings in this narrative, and they've been pummeled over as a result. So, I mean, that's sort of the narrative. You know, people will come back and say, well, if Yasser Arafat had done X, or if Yasser Arafat had done Y, or if, you know, pointing out that these are all the reasons why Palestinians don't have a homeland. I take issue with depicting history in this way, because in the end of the day, nobody ever, if we want to continue to say that, all displaced populations, if the Africans, Black Africans in South Africa deserved apartheid because they did not have the right leader at the right time, or if Native Americans deserve their displacement. Once you get into narratives where you have a weaker population being displaced and marginalized, because just forget about everything else and negotiate the sheer military force present in modern day Israel, and you're going to consistently blame the Palestinians for their displacement, you are basically arguing against every human rights convention, every human rights law that exists exists that guides the world. And so what I would urge people to say is that, well, when they say Palestinians didn't resist, no, Palestinians have consistently resisted, and they have suffered for this, and they have paid the price. They've paid the price both in terms of, their displacement. They have become refugees. They have been, the vast majority of Palestinians live in the diaspora today. They have, accepted the state of Israel. They have basically been begging the Israelis to give them some dignity on the West Bank. And what has that? Every effort has resulted in further and further and further entrenchment of Israel's presence on the West Bank today.
Thank you. For the third question, it's a little long, but I'll read it to you anyways. So history tells us that human beings colonized and conquered other human beings' territories. The Umayyad conquest of Hispania or Spain is one of the many examples of this behavior. In 1492, the Muslim invasion of Spain ended after 800 years of colonization. In 1492, Spain began their own colonization history that ended in the 1800s. So in your opinion, is this type of behavior of conquering and colonization a learned or natural human behavior?
Okay, so this idea of, so this is it's an interesting question. I don't want to get into too much history about the history of expansion and empires and colonial projects and imperial projects, but let's just update, fast forward to 1945 and the Geneva Convention, where more or less the dignity of citizens and people and lands and states should be protected. Right, so now we're in the modern period, and people have the right to self-determination, right? And so no population should be living under the rule of another population or country where their human rights are being reduced every day systematically. So whether that is nurture or nature, I think is besides the issue. The issue is that this world order claims that it is being dictated by the norms of quote unquote civilization, where all people should enjoy certain rights and protections, and these protections clearly are missing for the Palestinian people.
And for the fourth and final question, aren't settlers given financial incentives to move from other countries, particularly from Africa, specifically in the case of the Ethiopians, and the highways being built that divide the West Bank even more? Palestinians are not even allowed to use or cross this. Is this correct?
So Barry, I missed the first part, the one related to Ethiopia. I apologize.
Sorry. So they ask, aren't settlers in Palestine in the West Bank given financial incentives to move from other countries, specifically the case of Ethiopians?
So I'll be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the monetary compensation is for Ethiopians, but I will say that it's well understood that settlers receive monetary benefits to live on the settlements. So it's much more affordable to live on a settlement than it is, let's say, to live in Tel Aviv, right? So there are incentives by the Israeli government to have settlers on the West Bank. And it is true that Palestinians cannot drive on Israeli roads designed for the settlers on the West Bank. Palestinians can also, cannot enter Jerusalem without permission, which the permission is hardly ever granted. So just to give you a sense of the type of segregation and the restrictions on movement on the West Bank.
That's the end of our Q&A session. Thank you so much again, Dr. Jamal, for everything that you've taught us and told us in our session today. We hope that we can keep learning from you, and we hope to have you again sometime soon. Thank you everyone for your attention and your engagement in the chat during this session. I'd like to sincerely thank EMG COVID Testing for being a sponsor of our conference. And I'd also like to give a big shout out for our tech moderator, Ahmed Jamhour, for taking care of all the behind the scenes logistics, and also Layali Mustafa for also helping behind the scenes. Right now, we will take a short 2-minute break and follow with a workshop by Rebel Diaz. See you guys soon. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Hello again, everyone. Sorry that was such a short break, but we do want to be mindful of time and keep us going, and also be mindful of our speakers' time because there is a time difference. And so I'm just here to get us started. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Hassan Samna, who will be moderating our session for today.
Thanks, Abir. Hello, marhaba, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the fourth panel of the 2021 PACC Conference. My name is Hassan Samna, and today I'm presenting our Cultural Resistance and Self-Determination workshop, which will explain how structural violence affects multiple communities and provide history of other struggles and how other communities have struggled in the past to help us start thinking about solidarity networks. Joining us today is Rebel Diaz, Rod Stars in G1, who grew up in Chicago and came up in the South Bronx, are sons of political refugees from Chile who fled a CIA-funded dictatorship in the 70s. Revolution raised them, and the culture of hip-hop provided them their own nueva canción. They've been doing rebel rap since the Clinton era, sharing their story and those of their people. El Barrio, the hood, the poor, Los Immigrantes. Rebel Diaz will present for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session. Please feel free to type out your questions throughout the session, and we'll get to them in the order they were received. And now, without further ado, joining us all the way from Chile, Rebel Diaz.
Peace. Well, this is Rod Stars. I'm the only one that's in Chile. My brother G1 is actually in Chicago. We in two different continents. So let me see if he's on here.
Yo,
how's everybody doing? Y'all good? Everybody's good? That's what's up. Definitely want to send a lot of solidarity and say free Palestine before we even start. I'm actually in Chile. Where there is it's the largest actually population of Palestinians outside of Palestine. You know what I'm saying? And so it's crazy. Like it's 2.5 the population. Chile's a small country. We have 18 million people, so 500,000 Palestinians, strong in Chile. And it's bugged out because when I was a kid, you know what I mean, not knowing. In Chile, the Palestinians, they call them turcos, erroneously, based on some of the passports of some of the first immigrants that arrived in Chile. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, it's just, it's a beautiful thing to be out here, having, done work for Palestine and solidarity to be here. And, there's a Palestine soccer team in which the number 1 is the shape of Palestine, of the map of Palestine. And so, it's interesting. And it's bugged out though too, because a lot of the population is Christian. You know what I'm saying? The most of them, are Muslim. The majority of them are Christian, and they've come here through war. You know what I'm saying? The migration that the Palestinian community here in Chile has arrived first in the 1850s. I think it was the Crimean War, and then World War I, and then the War of, 1848. And so 1948. So 3 waves of war, brought the Palestinian community over here. So I'm in Chile, and so I definitely had at least drop a little something about that before I spoke about it, because the Palestinian community where I'm at is definitely represented. And so, yeah, my brother G1 is on. What's up, G? How's Chicago?
What's up? Peace, everybody.
Yeah, we in the
over
summertime
here,
out here. So,
blessing and grateful to be able to share this space with y'all. Sending much love from Chicago. We grew up here in Chicago, and the Palestinian community here helped raise us as internationalists in support of a free Palestine, in support of a liberated Puerto Rico, in support of liberated territories worldwide. So I want to thank y'all for this space and being able to share some of our perspectives and some of our ideas. So peace and blessings to everybody.
That's what's up. So we're gonna do a workshop, you know what I'm saying, now that we introduce ourselves, and we're gonna talk about structural violence, affecting multiple communities. We're gonna talk about self-determination, you know what I mean? We're gonna talk about resistance. We're gonna share a little bit about our work, in the context of self-determination, share a little bit about our history as well. We live in, we'll go into it more later, but we see so many similarities between the struggle of our indigenous Mapuche community, and the military occupation that's going on over there right now. And, just seeing that, we was building. And so we see that, similarities of struggle, you know what I'm saying, before anything. So let's do this workshop, G. Let's get to it. You down with it?
Yeah, I heard you want to kick some bars though too. Is that still happening?
Oh man, we gonna start off with the culture. That's what we do when culture works. Look, it goes, Viva Palestina, esta tierra es mi amiga, un saludo le mandamos hip hop, the rebel Diaz, israelita asesino, con dinero de los gringos. You can never ever kill off the true spirit of the people, cause the boy won't smile. The boy's in shock, cause he just saw his brother get his face blown off. The girl is so sad. She holding on a coffin. The boyfriend's a casualty to a U.S. rocket. Inferno, death, badly burned skin, blood spills everywhere. The images make me cringe. The mama can't cry. Her tears are too dry. Murders, homicides multiplied times 9. The innocent are dying. Their house is on fire. The news is still lying. The new president is quiet. It's a violent crime, no respect for human rights. And they don't seem to care about the loss of human life. Not one single dollar, bro. One single dime should be given in support of this genocide. The Israelis are the killers. They are so wrong. Since I can't afford a bomb, I had to make this song.
So we say free Palestine, free
Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine.
While we shopping, bombs are dropping. Ellos saben lo que hacen. Tanques made in USA. Israel army invades. Philistine under siege. No peace if you can't eat. And you can't in when you're locked in. What's the rocket? When your house getting bombed in, what's the option? Respond. Who the terrorists? Keep them honest. Ain't it violence to keep us impoverished? At the margins or locked in behind watchtowers. Same sickness, different symptom of a system that's based on a mixture of fear and greed, not needs and wants, strong arms and guns, but they can be overcome. So we free Palestine, free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
All right, yeah, we want to share that real quick.
Free Palestine, brothers. Free Palestine, brothers. That's right.
Peace.
Un Latino aquí en la casa, papi.
Eso, mi hermano. I know the call and response is a little difficult in the virtual world, but we feel y'all energy and we see y'all faces. So peace and love. We could get started with the knowledge, Rod. I'm with it. We could. I'm
Let's drop the knowledge.
Yeah, I'm gonna quickly share my screen here. Let me see if I'm allowed. I think that I am. And give me 1 second. I'm pulling it up. Okay, I think it's not letting me share. Am I allowed to share? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, I just got co-host status. All right. Okay, here we go. This should be good here. Y'all see my y'all see my screen?
Yes.
All right, cool. So I know that y'all mentioned some of this conversations, but we want to make sure that we're all on the same boat whenever we're talking about the context that we live in today, and whether it's a struggle for Palestine, a struggle for Black liberation, the struggle for Puerto Rican independence. We know that the foundation of it is European colonialism, and these maps here show European colonialism throughout the years. This next chart right here, some of you may have seen this, all the little dots that we see coming from Western Africa going to the Americas are ships carrying enslaved people from Africa. The foundation of capitalism in the West here, laying on this horrible history of enslaved people, creating the basis for capitalism. You see how it increases. We'd like to obviously point out that enslaved people were brought through all of the Americas, which speaks to the struggle for Black liberation worldwide.
G, the chart's not showing up for me on the screen.
I'm sorry. Is anybody else not being able to see the screen?
I think you need to put it in presenter view.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Pardon me. Okay, I just did presenter view. Okay, well, we're just gonna see the whole screen, the whole the entire screen. Y'all see the whole screen there? Yeah, the PowerPoint. Yes. Yes, no?
It's still in your screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure why the presenter view is not popping up for me. But if y'all can see
just
the information, that's what matters.
bottom left. There's a third icon. You can just click it. Yeah, right there. It should pop up. Right. It didn't.
Yeah, nothing's popping up when I click it, unfortunately. But can y'all see the info at least? It doesn't have to be full screen.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, that's cool. We keep it moving. Okay. And just to finish off with the maps, this is an image of the land lost here on Turtle Island. Also, again, just so we can all be on the same page in regards to what the foundation for this empire is. A theft of people, a theft of land, a theft of labor, setting the basis for where we're at today. So we just want to make sure that we are on the same page. We're all cool with that, right? We're on that same page. That's what's up. All right. And so for us, when people ask us, about cultural resistance, for us, or even to ask you, what are you guys? Are you guys anarchists? Are you guys communists? What are you guys? And we'd be like, man, we hip hop. Because for us, the culture that raised us, the culture that we came up in, that we practiced and we saw as our cultural resistance was hip hop. But we're not even going to get into the details of hip hop. But what we do want to do is be able to share a little bit about our story. And what that starts with is really why we emigrate, why people are being displaced. And so I'll quickly share this here. We come from, I don't know if y'all see my cursor. Y'all see my cursor? So our family came from this little skinny country right here on the western coast of South America, Chile. All the countries that are in red are countries that have been invaded or have been intervened by the US military or CIA since World War II. This colonial project is in process still, and the resistance to it is in process still, so you can add a lot of different countries to the map. But when we talk about displacement of people in our specific story, is being displaced because of US and CIA intervention. And you can see that has been the case for many people, for most of the world throughout the last 70 years. And so for us, Rod, you want to talk a little bit about Chile? Hello? Rasta, you're muted, brother.
Pull the chart up.
All right, all right.
Let's do this.
You want to see, I'm sorry, you want to see that same chart I just had up?
No, the 9/11 one.
All right, I got you, sir.
So what we're seeing is a history that started for us on September 11th, 1973, when there was a CIA-funded military dictatorship that overthrew the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende. The images that you're seeing are September 11th, what we call the first 9/11, 9/11/73. And these are US-funded, CIA-funded military that started a bloody military dictatorship that was led by General Augusto Pinochet. This dictatorship lasted, about 17 years, in which there were thousands tortured in concentration camps by School of the America trained military. And we're clear that what happened in Chile on 9/11 was a direct attack on the ideas of socialism, of having land distribution, of having, income equality, and, having their natural resources such as copper, stay in the hands of the people. And so we come from this history, 9/11/73. And at the same time, it's crazy because we grew up in Chicago, right? And then you have the think tank behind this neoliberal economic project, because that's what happens in Chile, you know what I'm saying? In which Milton Friedman, a University of Chicago professor, and some Chilean economist students basically justified the violence in Chile as calling for an authoritarian regime with an iron fist to impose this neoliberal economic model. Here you see them with Augusto Pinochet. Neoliberalism, you know what I'm saying, is crazy because it started really as a fancy way of saying, new capitalism. And in the 70s, capitalism was in crisis, very similar to how capitalism is in crisis right now. You know what I'm saying? And so the Chicago boys economy, this economic model, you know what I mean, really was an experiment for the world. And what did that mean? Privatization. When you talk about Palestine and them not having access to water, you're talking about similarities with Chile, which has its water privatized, you know what I'm saying? In which the Mapuche communities have had their water taken away when there's, resourceful rivers. And so I say that in that, the connections that we make internationally, while it's a personal story, it's very much, a history of neoliberalism that starts on this date moving forward. G, you want to break down some more stuff for them?
Oh, for sure. We could do that. I want to think about some dates real quick. And we're going to do some math. I think math was my worst subject going to school. I felt like I stopped learning math in 8th grade, but we're going to do some math real quick and see if we can build on some ideas. When we talk about 9/11/73, we look at that decade, and the beginning of that decade of the 1970s is a key moment, like Rostas was mentioning, about capitalism being in crisis. I'm gonna run by 3 graphs. They'll be super quick, I promise. This graph shows the manufacturing jobs. It starts in the 1970s. What's the overall trend of manufacturing jobs since the 1970s? Down, right? All right. In the Bronx or in Chicago, before in the 1960s, 50s, you might even be able to have a 1-income household and raise a family. All right, that changes starting in the 1970s because of all these jobs going overseas. And we talk about why they went overseas. We could refer back to that map showing all those red shaded countries where the US and the CIA intervened, because remember, they're not intervening just to go have a military adventure. They're going to protect the interests of multinational corporations looking to exploit those resources. So boom, manufacturing jobs go down. All right, we're gonna look at this real quick. This shows 2 lines. The dark blue line shows productivity. This graph starts in the 1950s. All right, productivity is the dark blue line. It's going good together with hourly compensation, which is the light blue line, wages, salaries. From the 1950s, it's going good. Everybody's living their American dream. They're getting their white picket fence. They're moving to the suburbs. They got a new gas guzzling car. Things are going well. Right about here, the line splits. About what year is that? Right around 1973, there's a split. The productivity keeps going high. What happens to the wages? Flatline. And if you take into account inflation, we've had decreases in wages in the last 50 years. It's crazy because we've been talking about the 1970s for some time now, and I feel myself getting older when I'm like, oh, actually, no, that's all almost 50 years ago. So yes, almost 50 years of declining wages. All right. Again, we're thinking about 9/11/73. We also, for us, our context of hip hop began in the 1970s. It's a very crucial moment. We're going to look at one last one. This is the number of people incarcerated in the United States. The graph starts in 1925. There's a huge change that occurs right around here. What year is that? 1973, 1974. What happens after 1973, 1974 to the number of people incarcerated in this country?
There's an explosion. There's a exponential rise.
It's a more than a 500% increase. In the decade of 1970s, you had about 200,000 people. That number today is at almost 3 million. If you count the number of people that are on parole, probation, or immigrant detention centers, or house arrest, that number approaches 20 million. So what we're looking at, and this is the reason why we do this math, is the changes that have occurred as a result of this new version of capitalism called neoliberalism, which came into play starting in the 1970s. You have a whole generation of people that have grown up either unemployed, underemployed, or underpaid. And as a result, you have a whole generation of people that are also been subjected to the mass incarceration state, which has disproportionately, obviously, affected Black and brown communities.
And G, when we talk about, right, this economic model in the context of structural violence, we have to be clear that neoliberalism is inherently a violent model of economics, you know what I'm saying, in which the private sector, you know what I mean, pretty much by any means gains profit. And what's crazy is that you look at it, you know, mass incarceration being violence, poverty being, you know, violence, the conditions of poor people, you know, throughout the world in the last 50 years, you know what I mean, has been that of violence, and a type of violence that we're only going to see increase. You know what I mean? A type of violence in which we like to call it that the state has a monopoly on violence to the level that they can even define what's violent and what's not violent. And so, you know, while I'm out here in Chile, you know, it's crazy that we're talking about, you know, structural violence. I've been thinking about this, you know, as this week was coming up. And, you know, here we are, you know, where there's a social uprising going on, which there's thousands of people in the streets, you know, pretty much demanding an end to the neoliberal model. Out here, they have a saying that goes, until dignity becomes custom, because neoliberalism has not allowed people to live a life with dignity. And so when we look at it, you know, going back to the idea of a monopoly of violence, they've even monopolized, you know, violence to the point that resistance of people becomes the only thing that's violent, and not the state, which are the ones that have the tear gas, that have the tanks, that have the rubber bullets, that are shooting people's eyes out. You know, here in Chile, in the social uprising of 2019, more than 650 people had their eyes shot out and suffered, you know, ocular trauma. You know what I'm saying? This is a tactic that was taught to Chilean police by the Israeli military, because, you know, who are the ones that are also getting their eyes shot out? You know what I mean? The Palestinians are the ones that are suffering this ocular trauma as well. We saw the influence of Israeli police teaching police all over the United States. And more than 250 people in the US in the George Floyd uprisings and the Breonna Taylor uprisings also lost their eyes. You know, these are tactics that the state has as it imposes its monopoly of violence. And we say that we have to understand this, that, you know, the resistance, you know what I'm saying, of a young Palestinian, you know, with a slingshot, or a young Mapuche, you know what I'm saying, throwing a rock at the police. This is resistance to state violence, you know what I mean? And at the same time, I think it's an important thing to touch on, because many times, you know, the media falls into this you know, narrative of the good protester versus the bad protester. You know, and I think that throughout the world, what we're seeing is that people are demanding, you know what I mean, that the system get their boot off their necks, you know what I mean? And whatever that resistance looks like should be something that is respected and justified, because we are clear that it's in the context of the state having a monopoly on violence. You know what I'm saying? So I just wanted to share that, because I feel like it's important, especially where I'm at right now. You know what I'm saying? Seeing everything that's going on. Like right now, there's people out in the streets. Right now, you walk outside and the tear gas is so strong that the day after the protest, there's elders that can't walk down the street. And so, you know, I know the Palestinian community knows about this, but I'm sharing in the context of seeing that violence is one of the number one imports of the empire. You know what I'm saying? When we talk about the United States, we can't talk about the US empire without talking about his little, his most favorite brother, which is the Israelis. You know what I'm saying? And so I share that because I think it's important that we talk about violence in that context and that we gotta respect people's resistance no matter what. Dale G, eso todo.
Word, brother. Thank you for sharing that. And so, for us, Rod, I don't know you want to get into the RDAC work. Was that the move? So we could talk a little bit about cultural resistance. You're muted. You're muted, Rassos.
For sure. Let's talk about that real quick. Some of the stuff that we would talk about when we were doing organizing. For folks that don't know, we for years doing a lot of organizing in the hood in the Bronx, one of the poorest congressional districts in the U.S. And for us, it was important. We had a little motto while we was doing the work, and it was, you can't just oppose, you gotta propose. You know what I'm saying? I say that again, you can't just oppose, you gotta propose. And I feel like that was super important, especially when it comes to organizing the community. We clear on, who the common enemy, we clear that the police was attacking us, but what were our proposals? What did our self-determination look like? What did our self-determination, lead us to organize? And so, let's talk a little bit about some of that work that went down in 2008. And I share that because in 2008, we made the political decision in our community to take over an abandoned candy factory and turn it into a an autonomous ran space, a people's community space that was ran without the influence of the nonprofit industrial complex, and that which we were really practicing autogestión, self-sustainability, you know what I'm saying? Just organizing, really practicing our self-determination and building community through the arts. In this case, a lot of it was media, a lot of it was technology, you know what I'm saying? And so let's talk a little about that. You got some of the images, bro?
Word, I have this little video. Would you like me to share this video?
Yeah, for sure, that'd be love.
Okay, cool. This is just a quick summary of some of the work that we did. For us, hip hop culture is about reclaiming that space that we showed in the last 40, 50 years, that physical terrain that has become increasingly criminalized for young people. And so for us, the idea to be able to create a liberated space was key in terms of being able to build around hip hop culture in our neighborhood. Y'all can see that black screen right there? And can you hear it?
The sound's gone. I think that yeah.
Abandoned by society, took it upon themselves to create beauty from their despair, to paint trains with their names and mix bricks while b-boys and b-girls did their thing on the dance floor. Hip-hop, born in the 1970s in conditions of high unemployment, burned down buildings and underfunded schools. Hip-hop culture has spawned what is today a multi-billion-dollar rap industry. Yet almost 40 years since its birth, for many in the Bronx, conditions of poverty and inequality haven't changed. The RDAC opened in 2008 in an abandoned candy factory in the South Bronx. Initiated by members of hip-hop group Rebel Diaz and a collective of young people from throughout the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, the RDAC was formed. The space was built and developed with the help of donated materials and labor from local carpenters, electricians, and artists volunteering their time and talents for a collective community effort. The result, a 5,000 square foot space has served as a multi-purpose resource for creative young people. Since 2008, we have served over 10,000 participants in our programs. At RDAC, we feel that by promoting a sense of community, ownership, and responsibility through the arts, we can begin to more effectively address the larger issues of the South Bronx and beyond.
Word. So that was, go ahead, Rob.
No. So that that was the video. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but that's hip hop. You know what I mean? Like they say, hip hop is about reinventing everything. So sometimes we have a little technological issues. But I hope y'all understood the main idea. The video, which besides being a throwback video, I think for us really shows, the idea of really, a lot of times, and I think in social movements we have this concept of, it's kind of like a Messiah complex. We're gonna empower the poor. You know what I'm saying? And so we like to say, we not organizing the poor. We poor people organizing. And I think that for us, that's really been the main spirit behind a lot of the political work that we've done. This space particularly for us was the idea of not waiting, for people to come around and like save us. It was the idea of organizing locally, and really trying to build self-determination. And what did that look like? Creating self-sustainability, creating a safe space. You know what I'm saying? I think it's crazy because, when we talk about our communities, granted, we're not occupied with a military, but like G said in his rap starting, we have armed watchtowers as well in the Bronx. You know what I mean? And we say that because when you live in a space in which there is a stop and frisk, in which there is broken windows policing, in which young people literally have a target on their back. We felt that it was important to create a safe space where culture could be practiced. And so when we talk about culture in the South Bronx, we're talking about a culture that has spread worldwide. You know what I'm saying? I remember doing a show a couple years ago in Chicago with the hip hop group Damn, and we were rocking the shirts. Hip hop didn't die, it's alive in Palestine. And just seeing how that culture, started in the Bronx and has spread worldwide, we thought it was important to have a community space, an autonomous community space. So here you see the graffiti. That was the first one we did. On the left, you got like the image of, Angela Davis. On the right, we had a Puerto Rican independence leader, Albizu Campos. You can't see him in the picture, but this is the Rebel Diaz Arts Collective. The first mural that we did, because we took over this factory in 2008. And I remember that in 2009, Obama's presidency kicks off with a horrible bombing of Gaza. And so it's crazy that the first mural that we threw up on our rooftop, and these are murals that you can see from the highway, was I Love Gaza, and we felt, with the spirit of, showing love and building, it was that I Love Gaza. So that was crazy that we started, our hip hop community space with that mural. And then we realized let's keep doing, political art. So the mural had I Am Troy Davis. Then we had, No Human Being is Illegal. You know what I'm saying? Talking about, the immigrants in our community. And, we're not saying immigration reform, we're just making a political statement. No human being is illegal. And so this is a picture from the highway. So you get an idea of how many folks, were able to see this art. And I think that it's important that we talk about art. We're artists, living in a pandemic, which is a tough time, but I think it's also important to talk about the importance of culture, in spaces of resistance. A lot of times culture seems to be like if it were a recipe, it's the little salt they sprinkle on top. And we feel it's important that culture be looked at as a main ingredient of change, of resistance. We feel like we're cultural workers in this larger, people's, movement. And as cultural workers, it's our job to use culture and art to make the ideas of resistance and revolution irresistible. That's how we feel when we approach our art. We're not accountable to the corporations. We're accountable to our communities. You know what I'm saying? And so we feel that, you know, with this space, that was definitely the idea. And just wanted to share a little bit about, you know, that making some connections. So when we did the No Human Being is Illegal mural, we was like, yo, people showing mad love. We had all kind of people hitting us up about it. And so I got to shout out the artist, Dasik Fernandez. He's an amazing artist out of Chile. And then we're like, let's make, you know, let's be self-sustainable. So we started doing No Human Being is Illegal t-shirts, right? And then, you know, Rebel Diaz, we're a group, we perform a lot, and travel, and, you know, try to get the messages of the people out. And so we did a concert with a well-known artist. You know what I'm saying? We not famous, but we always rock as much as we done open for a lot of the big dogs. So we and opened up for Calle 13, which is a big, you know, artist on the, you know, the more Latin side of the world, you know, but really just an artist that also has similar messages as Rebel Diaz. And so, boom, we go to a show and we roll up on folks all the time at the shows like, yo, you got to rock this shirt. And so the brother from Calle 13 wore the shirt, right, for the show. This is about for like 15,000 people. Boom, so Calle 13 is rocking the shirt. And then the next day, because it was a huge show in Brooklyn, on the front page of the New York Times, Calle 13 comes out rocking the No Human Being is Illegal shirt. And the article clicks off immediately with the first line. I know it's small print, but the first line says, you know, no human being is illegal, read the shirt of, you know, Residente from Calle 13. And so it's just a real quick example of the power of culture where you could get a message from a wall in the hood on top of, you know, a band and factory hip hop space. Then the homies start wearing the shirt. And then next, you know, you got artists pushing those messages across, you know what I mean? And so just a quick example of ways of, you know, cultures of resistance and getting those ideas out. And then also making them shirts cool so that you could, you know what I'm saying, get them moving and at the same time fund your community centers and not have to depend on nonprofits and folks like that, kind of like driving your work with the funding, you know what I'm saying? And so yeah, just some of that. And then G, you want to keep going down and talk a little bit more about the murals, especially with Mumia, what's Mumia living now? I think it'd be love to bring that together.
Word. Well, this is when we talk about space, we lost this space. And one of the direct reasons we lost this space was because of this last mural that we did. I don't know if y'all remember in 2012, there was like a whole little social media campaign that smelled like it was from the CIA. It was like Coney 2012. I don't know if y'all remember that. And we did a play on the Coney 2012, and we put Free Mumia 2012. You know, I think we got a little confident with putting all these murals up because we thought it would be no problem. And what ended up happening was the Policemen's Benevolent Association, the police union, representing the police officers in New York City, they saw the mural, and you know, Mumia Abu-Jamal, political prisoner, former Black Panther, who's actually fighting for his life right now. We have to shout him out. You know, the message we put forth is the only thing that can save Mumia's life is liberation, is being freed from prison. And so we want to send that energy out there. But Mumia Abu-Jamal, to this day, even behind bars, is a threat because of his ideas. And so when the Policemen's Benevolent Association seen this mural, they figured out what building it was on. They found the address. They didn't even go to the owners of the building. They went to the people that were insuring these buildings. We had occupied a building that was technically owned by a slumlord who owned the entire block, literally the entire block of industrial strip we was on in the Bronx. And they saw this mural. They contacted the insurance company. The insurance company contacted the owner of the building and said, hey, we have to raise your rates because you're doing political campaigning on your wall. And that was enough for the owner to finally take action and evict us from the space. And so for us, I think that's also one of the lessons learned, that cultural workers being an integral part of a movement, we can't function alone. We have to have the support of everybody. And unfortunately, we lost this space, but the people that came together to defend it in that moment represented different sectors, you know what I'm saying? Not just cultural workers. It was union workers. It was students. You know what I'm saying? It was folks that was unemployed. It was neighborhood people to come defend the space, as well as the ones that created the space. You know what I'm saying? So this was what eventually led us to lose the space. But again, for us, in terms of even lessons learned, knowing the importance of the fact that even when you occupy a space, at the end of the day, if your ideas within that space become a threat to the structures of power, you will be met with that state violence that Rasaz was just talking about earlier.
Word up, G. How are we, Abir, how are we doing on time? I want to make sure that we can have a discussion. I also see we haven't been answering the questions, so I definitely want to scroll through the chats and just kind of build with the people and talk about it. Is that cool? That's cool with y'all?
Yeah, we can do that. We're keeping track of all the questions. There's also a lot of comments if we want to go through the comments also, but we have the questions on the side. I just want to say I'm going to start us off for the Q&A. It's great to see you both again. You guys bring such a necessary energy, so I really appreciate everything that and there are so many comments, I don't know if you caught them in the chat, about how you're teaching things that people don't learn in school and how appreciative everyone is of the knowledge and the information that you always share with us. I also just realized that for the last 3 years, we have done this workshop at the same time of the year. So I think it's just gonna become an annual thing, but I'm really appreciative and grateful for you both. So the first question to start us off is the quote, Chilean miracle due to the financial boom of Chile is well known around the world. After Pinochet left, Chile's democracy grew and became a beacon of hope for Latinos. What is the current state of Chile in terms of democracy and financial integration?
That Chilean miracle was smoke and mirrors. It was a farce, because the miracle was a miracle for a very small percentage of the population. And I think that what we're seeing today, there's been a social uprising that started October 18th, 2019. And the slogan said, it's not 30 cents, it's 30 years. And I think that what that slogan talked about was the fact that, it was high school students, 15 years old, 16 years old, who were doing a mass evasion of paying for their metro fare, for the train fare. And so they all jumped the turnstiles, and that turnstile jump in was met with brutal beatings by the PACCOs, which is what we call the police, you know what I'm saying? And so at the end of the day, that abuse was seen, because now we have technology that has social media and kids have phones. And the next day, the whole nation, shut the nation down with a pretty much people's general strike. And that resistance lasted for 6 months. There was creations of front lines, people resisting, because what's going on in Chile, these folks are being bombarded with chemical warfare. There's trucks that are, running around shooting people down with chemical warfare, toxic, gases and tear gas and rubber bullets. And so, not just focusing on this most recent social uprising, but we're clear that, when the students say it's not 30 cents, it's 30 years. It's been 30 years that I would pretty much compare to the Democrats and Republicans. They've been literally switching back and forth between Bachelet and Piñera. And these are 30 years in which a neoliberal economic model, has, pretty much, not allowed Chileans to live with dignity. The people that joined the students started talking about other issues, the horrible, retirements for folks that can't live off $150 a month of retirement after working their whole lives, while others, pretty much, live off the fat of the land. And so we're clear that what we're seeing in Chile is literally an attempt of the people to kill the neoliberal economic model that has not allowed them to live a life of dignity. And so I want to be clear about that this Chilean miracle was a miracle for very few, very much how we see across the world, in which the rich, benefit off of the work of people's backs. And that's not even talking about the Mapuche, colonization folks that have been displaced of their land, for more than 500 years. So I think that it's important that, we also address that the Mapuche communities under dictatorship of Pinochet or under a so-called democracy have been faced with the same amount of violent force.
Okay, and I have another question. In thinking of hip hop as resistance, how has the genre served to amplify the lived realities of Palestinian people? And are there any artists that we should know about?
Gee, I'll let you rock.
Yeah, I wanna share something. I think that that's instructive for how we view hip hop as a culture of resistance. See if this works. Y'all see a black screen? Hey. I gotta show this picture. This small snapshot of a moment in the first few years of hip hop culture to us speaks thousands of words. I'll flip it back to y'all real quick. What do y'all see in this picture? Maybe y'all can unmute yourselves and just comment on whatever you see. I'll start. I see a fan. What's the fan for? The fan.
So the equipment cannot get overheated.
Hey, you already know. You turn the speakers up, the amps get working.
That's right,
You don't want
son.
them speakers to blow. All right.
For the boogie down, son.
So what we have here also is a generation who was disinvested in, and they figured out ways to apply their knowledge, and they turned this little thing right here, this turntable that used to be a playback device, they turned it into a percussion instrument in an era where music and arts programs were being gutted, similar to how we see today. They turned their knowledge of electrical work into setting up amplification systems and speaker systems. All right, so the fan. What else y'all see in that picture? Anybody can speak up or write it in the chat.
Tables. And they're scratching.
They're scratching, right? They're scratching on the turntables. Like we said, these devices that used to be playback devices get turned into instruments. All right, what else? What else we see in that picture?
An MC.
An MC. So you had different people coming together. This is a picture of one of the first some of the first park jams that were going down. This before they even called it hip hop, right? And right, you got the homie with the microphone, the MC, the master of ceremonies, all right, holding it down. And also representing the different elements of hip hop culture. The MC, you got the DJ, maybe not in the shot. You got some B-boys and B-girls doing their thing on the dance floor. What else we see in this picture? Anybody?
There's kids in the back, so it's a whole community experience.
Yeah, I love that observation. Exactly. We got shorties in the cut. We got the grandmas. They talk about how some of the first hip hop parties that were not outdoors, the ones that were indoors in the rec centers of the project buildings, you know, it was a family affair. You'd have the little ones, you know, sleeping in the stroller with covered up by some coats, you know, old school family party style. So yes, a multi-generational gathering. A lot of times when we think about culture, you know, it's a phenomenon only of the last 50, 60 years where culture is segmented into, you know, this is for the youth, and this is for the teenagers, and this is for the 20-somethings, and this is for the elders. You know, previously to that, and the idea of commodifying and packaging culture was for everybody. And so when you talk about the beginnings of hip hop culture, it reflected that it was a multi-generational affair in a public space. So yes, definitely. Thank you for that observation as well about the young people in the cut. What else? Anybody? I don't see the chat, so unfortunately I can't see if anybody's commented on the chat. But
hey, G, I want to comment. It was resourceful, innovative, like all the wires. You know what I'm saying? They was making it happen, regardless.
Right. Absolutely. You got my man right here, down here, look like he's the equivalent of the modern day Zoom technician that's handling the Zoom chat and the technologies involved, right? He's making sure everything goes good. What else?
It's looks like exclusively people of color.
Yeah, it's all, and not just people of color, it's black people.
Black people, yeah.
Word up. It's all black people. And so in particular for what the situation was in the Bronx, you know, we saw earlier those that graphic that showed those different little dots representing ships carrying enslaved people to all of the Americas. And the reality is that in the Bronx, because of different immigration patterns, you had African descendants from Latin America, from the Caribbean. So in this picture, this brother right here could be, African American and migrated from the South. This brother right here could be Cuban. This brother right here could be Puerto Rican, and also a foundation for what hip hop culture was and is rooted in the African diaspora. So for sure, that's a very on point observation. Anybody else?
Gee, I think this is, it looks like West Farms in the Bronx back in the 1981, 1980.
My man, you about to hit it on the nose. I think you close. Rastas, I know you have more information on a specific park, but go ahead.
I think, yeah, this park is actually, this is actually 1983, and it's, I believe, is on like 183rd and 3rd Avenue, something like that.
Word up. Okay, so yeah, it's the important takeaway I think for those that are not from the Bronx or from New York is that it's in a public space. It's a public park. You know what I'm saying? And my man right here, did he have to go pull a sound permit from the city? Did my man right here, did he have to pull a gathering assembly protest permit? Nah. All right, so they're gathering in a public space and it's not authorized by the state in any way. How about their electricity? Where they getting their electricity from?
From the light pole.
From the light pole. To this day in the Bronx, it's a cultural practice that you in a park and you got a light pole next to you. You kick the plate open, you connect the wires so you can invert the power source and have an outlet to plug your sound system into. And it's crazy because it began in the Bronx. It was a hallmark of hip hop culture, but to this day it survives. And you walk down a park in the Bronx in the spring and summertime, and every few feet the music changes. You hear some bachata, then you hear some salsa, then you hear some hip hop, then you hear some reggaeton. All right, so yeah, for sure. And that idea of, again, being able to gather resources in order to create these liberated cultural spaces and no type of authorization going down from the state. And so I'll just leave it at that until we could probably dissect this picture a million times more. But for us, it's going back to the question, when we talk about why we root ourselves in this culture, we look at hip hop as a culture of displaced peoples. You know what I'm saying? When we talked earlier about you know what I'm saying? Oh, how do you identify? Are you, are you a socialist? Are you communist? Are you Latinx? Are you, and the response that we give would be like, yo, we hip hop, because that for us is the culture that we grew up in. That was the combination of all these displaced peoples that ended up in the heart of the empire. You know what I'm saying? And for us, this picture illustrates how it's a culture of resistance that was about taking over public space, that was about organizing. I mean, you got to think, before social media, how will people even know about your jam? You got to get the homie that draws the flyer. You gotta make some copies of that flyer. You gotta hit the block and let people know about it. You gotta tell the breakers and the b-boys and the b-girls and the dancers to come by. You gotta have, I think these homies right here in the back are security. So there's a whole process of organic self-organization, self-determination that occurs as the foundation of hip hop culture. And for us, we feel that this picture expresses that. And when you talk about the trajectory of it, in the almost 50 years of its existence, we go back to those graphs. It's a time of mass unemployment. It's a time of deindustrialization. It's a time where this physical space, this very park, has become a criminalized space. You know what I'm saying? We talk about growing up in the Chi, that we had over here, we had the anti-gang loitering law. And in the 90s here in Chicago, if you were to stand on a corner with 3 or more people, you'd be accused of gang activity. And so they could take you, could lock you up just for standing on the corner in a group of 3 or more. On the West Coast, they had the gang injunctions. In California, where they would map out entire neighborhoods, identify every young person within a certain age range in that neighborhood and have them in a database in order to be able to further criminalize them. And so when we talk about and I'm not sure this goes to the answer to the question, but when we talk about, Palestinian liberation, the reality is that we view it as ain't none of us free till we all free. Because what they do to the Palestinians, they start there, and then those practices move forward into other places. The same way that the legacy of slavery here in this country is not just an echo of slavery, but we see it different variations of that slavery and the economies that come with it within the empire. And so I unfortunately can't speak to Palestinian artists that were rocking in the 80s. I don't have too much familiarity with that. But in terms of how we feel the link to the Palestinian struggle is rooted in this idea of reclaiming space, of self-determination, and creating liberated spaces in the face of an encroaching oppressor.
Yeah, and I definitely got a shout out. B already beat me to it, but there's a lot of dope artists that I feel like represent and show solidarity. You have Shadia Mansour. You have Ana Tijoux, who's from Chile, who has an amazing song. One of my favorite joints actually with Shadia Mansour. So it's Ana Tijoux. Then you have Dead Prez. You know what I'm saying? The brothers, whose feet we stand on pretty much. We have Rebel Diaz always show love. No, but I definitely, brothers like Bamboo, you know what I'm saying? Filipino brother from the West Coast, you know what I'm saying? Brothers like Tef Poe, one of the leaders of the Ferguson movement that was, went to Palestine with a Black liberation delegation, you know what I'm saying, went out there. Brothers like Hassan Salam as well have joined, and been out to Palestine. Rest in peace to the brother Majesty, who was out there having, freestyle ciphers. Vic Mensa as well, they mentioned in the chat, also went to Palestine, and represent. These are artists that all one way or another have put up, their platforms and represented and shown solidarity. I know I'm missing, many artists, but definitely, Portavoz from Chile, has always shown support for the Palestinian liberation struggle as well. I know I'm missing so many of the reminders, so many of our friends, that are dope MCs, but there's definitely a lot of good hip hop out there that's about resistance and that has, stepped up and shown solidarity. Jaziri X, did a song about the checkpoints, that was going on. So yeah, I think it's.
I will also add, man, that a lot of those artists you named also not only their messaging and their music, but also risking their livelihoods and denying opportunities to go perform in places that are intended to whitewash Israeli violence. You know what I mean? And saying no to performing in certain venues or with certain promoters or with certain corporations that are sponsoring because they're linked to the occupation.
Yeah, Comrade Invisible from Detroit, you know what I'm saying? She always represents. So there's artists out there, yo, for sure.
Word.
Any more questions?
A couple more questions?
More. Yeah, there's more. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So the third question is, we often discuss how Israel shares their oppression tactics with colonizers and fellow fascists. What can we do as resistors to learn, share, and assist one another with collective liberation?
That's a great question. It's crazy. I remember when we landed in Ferguson in 2015. I'll never forget. We were doing an interview. We were working with with Telesur English, from the Bolivarian Revolution. There's a channel that was trying to, had to become an alternative. And so we're reporting and we interviewing the brothers and they like, yo, we out here getting, messages on Twitter from brothers in Palestine, giving us advice on how to deal with this tear gas, giving us advice on how to deal with these rubber bullets. And I thought it was so powerful. You know what I'm saying? It was so powerful to hear that, to hear that solidarity in action. A lot of times you make those connections. I remember we were on the border. We did a border encuentro against, with the School of the Americas against, the militarization of the border. And there was, folks talking about that the same, company that was building the wall, you know what I'm saying? This new wall is the same company that's building the wall, you know what I mean, in Palestine. And so, connecting struggles, the same tear gas that, that they're getting hit with in Palestine is the tear gas they're getting hit with in Ferguson and they're getting hit with in Oaxaca. that they're getting hit, in Chile. And so, oh, you got the clip, G? That's what's up. Play that real quick so they can see.
I got people in the Palestinian been sending me support. This go worldwide. Fuck this shit. They shooting these young brothers down the street like some niggas.
So there you have. I'm glad you found that clip. That that was one of the first interviews we did, and you have young Black liberation fighters, resisting an occupation in their town in Ferguson, and the first thing they talk about, we get solidarity from the Palestinians. I think that's a very powerful, connection and similarity, struggle, and solidarity. Word.
You're muted, Hassan.
Oh, sorry. For the sake of time, we're gonna combine the last two questions. So, where can we learn more about your work in art, and what inspired you to do the work that you're doing?
G.
Man, I would I guess to put it briefly, we grew up under the table of political meetings. Our parents were political prisoners. Our father was in concentration camps of Pinochet. Spent time disappeared, and so we're survivors. Our family are survivors of U.S. imperialism, and how the ironies of life are. We ended up growing up in the belly of the beast. And for us, the idea of hip hop, initially it was just our lived reality growing up in Chicago, mixed in with all the different, cultures that we was growing up with in Chicago. House music, you had the salsa influence of Puerto Rican community, but hip hop was our norte, that was what we built around. And for us, the time in the Bronx really was kind of combining this culture that we had grown up with, along with our family history, which had previously been like separate. It was like you had your, like I imagine it like people go to church on Sundays. We would go to a meeting for Palestinian liberation or Puerto Rican independence or whatever it may be. Here in Chicago during the 80s and early 90s, you had a lot of refugees coming from national liberation struggles in Latin America. And so for us, the work in the Bronx really was able to kind of bring together the culture of hip hop that we had grown up with, mixed in with some of our family history and this idea and spirit of internationalism, that we were able to kind of bring that together. So I would say that the inspiration definitely comes from that. Right? I don't know if you want to add to that.
I'm gonna share two quick short stories. So when I was a shorty, I won a raffle. I was at a political event, and I won a raffle. I was like 9 years old, and the raffle, I won the raffle. I feel like that's probably the only time I ever won a raffle. But I won a shirt that said Palestine on it, and I remember like my mom's like kind of warning me like, "Yo, you gotta rock the shirt, but people might come at you," because there was a lot of Jewish kids at the school I went to. It was like a local school in Lincoln Park neighborhood, which had some like rich Jewish kids. And I remember being like, I want a raffle, I'm wearing this shirt. And I wore my Palestine shirt. And so I remember like already knowing that Palestine stood for like resistance as a kid. And then another thing too, in Chicago, there was a spot called the Southwest Youth Collaborative. You know what I'm saying? That was ran by a Palestinian woman named Camille O'Day. You know what I'm saying? And they had, at that space, they had a hip hop university that was way ahead of its time. I'm talking about like late 90s. And as a B-boy, I was like, hip hop university, I lived all the way on the north side. Just take a train, Pulaski, all the way to the south side to participate in hip hop university with Raven and Zor, these hip hop legends. And, Maida Del Valle and Butter, like doing hip hop workshops. So it's crazy, you know what I mean? But inadvertently, Palestinian community leader opened up a space for me to do a lot of my first open mics and just have my open, through the Southwest Youth Collaborative. So I feel like just regardless, Palestine's always been part of the work that I've done on some hip hop shit even. And so, yeah, you can reach us at www.rebeldiaz.com. and at Rebel Diaz, REBLDIAZ, all together. That's our tag on social media, and that's what it is. Word up. Free Palestine, y'all. You already know.
Thank you so much for all the knowledge and experiences that you shared with us. Your constant support for your constant support for Palestine, and thank you everybody for your attention and the high energy during this session. I want to sincerely thank Manhattan Bagel for the sponsorship for this conference. And this concludes our sessions planned for the second day of our conference. We hope to see everybody tomorrow at 11 a.m. for a look at what's happening on the ground in Palestine today and present-day solidarity networks. Can we just end the session by chanting "Free Palestine" with everybody?
Yes. Can you guys lead us again, and just everyone can unmute now, and everyone can kind of do this together.
Go. Say free, free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free Palestine.
Free, free, free Palestine.
Oye, huevón, dilo en español, huevón. Dígalo en español.
Viva Palestina libre. Viva, viva Palestina libre. I don't know how to do the Spanish.
Viva, viva Palestina.
Colo, Colo, la universidad.
Colo, Colo y Palestino juntos en la lucha, hermano.
Dale, 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 papi.
Peace and love, y'all. Salute.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Palestina es mi corazón.
All right.
En mi
Yeah.
corazón.
Thank you, Abir. I'll see you tomorrow. Rania, thank you. Yeah, I spoke to my cousin. Javier says hello.
Say hi to him.
He's doing well. He's doing well.
Great.
So he said,
Say hi to him.
yes, sir. Have a good one. Thank you.
Take care.
Great job, Hassan. Good job.
Good job, guys. Good job. Really good job.
MashaAllah.
Thank you.
Carlos, Hassan,
Excellent.
Ahmed, and Barry. MashaAllah.
Hassan, Barry, Ahmed, everybody. ورانيا وعبير والكل كلهم مشاركين ما شاء الله عليهم.
يعطيكم العافية جميعا. يعطيك العافية مسامح منور.
الحمد لله، ايش اخبارك؟
هلا هلا منور. الله يقويكم.
يلا كل عام نشوفكم ان شاء الله بكره ان شاء الله تمور.
نراكم غدا ان شاء الله. مع السلامة.
ان شاء الله.
مع السلامة.
مع السلامة.
شفت انت ها؟ شوف تحكي لي شيء